last time I was trying to discuss complex Fourier series, and while discussing complex Fourier series, I made a slight mistake, which is that the argument here should be 2n pi. So there should have been 2 here. Same. So please correct it. And okay, so what we had was I was able to write the series for f of x as simply in terms of complex functions, because I could use the Euler formula. And so I was able to write f of x equal to, let me use the symbol t itself with a new definition, Tn e to the power I times 2 pi I'll put here nx by t. Okay. So you see that when x changes to x plus t, you have a 2 pi periodicity. So that's quite clear here. Now, I would like to apply this for expanding a function. So let me consider is equal to 0 for minus t by 2 less than x less than or equal to 0, and then is equal to 1 for 0 less than x less than or equal to t by 2. Okay. Well, there's a reason why you must have a closed interval on the right hand side and open on the left hand side, because otherwise the 2 will be related by 2 pi and you'll be overcome. So now let us. So what is C naught given by in this case? C naught is equal to integral minus t by 2 by 2, then 1 upon 2. Okay, and f of x is 0. Let me write f of x times e to the 0 times dx, because n is equal to 0. So this one is actually 1, so I don't have to worry about it. And since f of x equal to 0 between minus t by 2 less than x less than or equal to 0, I can actually write it as just 1 by t integral 0 to t by 2. F of x is 1, so I can actually put the value of 1 and then into dx, or I will get the value 1 by t into t by 2 minus 0, or that's equal to 1. So I get C naught is equal to 1/2 if I do this calculation. Let's see what I. So Cn also once again is equal to 1 upon integral 0 to t by 2. F of x is equal to 1 in this region, and I ignored the region where f of x was 0. So I will just write e to the 2 pi nx by t dx, and what I'll get from here is equal to 1 upon t 1 upon 2 pi I times n times rather it will be t by that times e to the power I times 2 pi nx by t between 0 and t by 2. Okay, and what will happen with this one? This is going to give me 1 upon 2 pi I times 2 pi n, and write equals and I will have when I will get the following. That is, you can just so we'll get basically minus 1 for sorry, there's no minus 1 for yeah. Okay, let me not be lazy. Let me. So I will have uh, when it is 0, it is 1 minus of when it is t by 2. I'll have e I 2 pi n t by 2 times t, and this is equal to 1 upon I times 2 pi n into 1 minus e to the power I n pi. Okay, and so what I'll get is the following. That is, when n is even, then e to the I n pi is equal to 1, and when n is odd, e to the I n pi is equal to minus 1. So I will get that this is equal to 1 upon I times pi n for n odd and 0 equal to 0 for n even. Okay, so now what I will get is so I can actually expand my series elements. So it was a very simple one that I had, because what I had was a 0 if I am having x versus f of x, and this is minus t by 2, and this is plus t by 2. It was actually a step function which was going up like this and jumping at this point. Okay, so this is 1 and this is 0. So that was the function, and that can be expanded as 1/2 plus 1 upon I pi sigma over n odd 1 by n e to the I n pi x by I to the I 2n pi x by t. Okay. Well, this is one of the interesting functions that I just. It's called the Heaviside function. This function is called Heaviside function. Or Heaviside is a single name function or step function. We encounter this in many situations. Okay, now let me talk about some properties of the series. Basically, you can say that fx is approximated by a set of orthogonal trigonometric functions. This is exactly what we are doing. So I can have various things like sequences I can create. I can say f n of x is equal to sigma over k equal to minus n to plus n ck e to the power I times 2 pi k x by t. So I am forming partial sums. Are you following what I'm saying? So if I take n to infinity, it's an infinite Fourier series, and I know that an infinite series in this case will converge, and I'll have the function back as an exact partial sums. So I can define it like f1 of x, f2 of x, etc. fn of x, all the way. Okay, so I have now got a sequence of functions. I want to see the convergence property of the sequence. So let me focus on a particular point x now. Okay. Let us examine at x naught. Okay. So you say that this sequence converges if there exists an n of x naught for a given epsilon. Epsilon is a very small number such that this quantity modulus fm x naught minus f of x naught, which is exact function, is less than epsilon for all m greater than n of x naught. Do you follow what I'm doing? I'm forming all these. Okay, so let me see. Let me plot it and show. Okay, I have this point x naught. Okay, and I have my true function f of x going something like that, and I have maybe f naught goes like this, and f1 will be going somewhere like that, and f2 will be going like that, and so on and so forth. So at this point, the difference between f2 and fx naught is this point. Okay, so supposing, let me say that this is actually going all the way, and then let us say that I have f of mx naught. Okay, so this is the difference epsilon. Now, if this difference between f of x and f of m at the point x naught is less than epsilon for all m greater than n of x, okay, n of x naught. So which means if I take this one, then if I take the next function, it will go like this. It will again be less than epsilon, okay, and it will never go into this point. So if this is m plus 1, you will never have m plus 1 going here. Because if m plus 1 corresponds to a function below f of m at x naught, then what happens is that it is not really converging, right? Because it is drifting away. Because at m you have epsilon, and at m plus 1, if you are going to be having a this function has a value which is much larger in difference with fx at the point x naught, then you would see that there is no convergence. So for a convergence, you should not have this green line. So if that happens, then you will see that there will be a convergence at the point x naught. Okay, so this means the sequence converges to f of x naught. Okay, so but now what happens? We are only looking at one point. We have to look at many points, right? So in general, very general way of doing it is that f of m times x, some value of x minus of f of x, okay, is less than epsilon for m greater than some n if it depends upon the point x, okay, because the convergence need not be the same at every point. Okay, so for example, you know, if I'm looking at this point, let me go down. Okay, so if I'm looking at x naught prime at this point, okay, so it may be that at the point f n of x, if this is the point, then at this point the difference could be epsilon, and which is much larger than this is epsilon for the x now. Okay, so which means that this difference that you are looking at, okay, that may actually be depending on the sequence that you are taking. That is, for every m greater than nx, you will have some epsilon. You choose an epsilon. Okay, you say I want a convergence criterion of 10 to the minus 3. So epsilon is 10 to the minus 3. So if you want the difference in the function to be less than 10 to the minus 3, then for that sequence m, so should be greater than n of at this point, and n may be something like 10,000 if epsilon is 10 to the minus 3. Okay, so let us say that epsilon is equal to 10 to the minus 3 at x and at x1, and for the same epsilon equal to 10 to the minus 3 at x2. If you think that n of x1 here is 1000 and n of x2 here is 10,000, then what happens is that you have to go much further in the sequence to get the same convergence at point x2 compared to what you got at point x1. Okay, so if this happens, then you say that the convergence is non-uniform. The convergence is non-uniform. It converges, but it is non-uniform if the integer n depends on x upon the position x. Okay, if this happens, it's going to be terrible, not really very favorable. But if at all points x, given an epsilon, n of x is the same, that is, n is independent of x, and satisfies fm x minus f of x, absolute value is less than epsilon for all m greater than n. So n is now not dependent upon the position. It is not like at point x1 you have n equal to 10,000, at point x2 you have n equal to 100,000, etc., etc. Okay, but it is the same for all points x. So if this, have you people done this? Hello, I am asking a question. Have you people done this before? Is there anyone there? Because it is a simple yes or no answer, and I don't hear anything from Gautam. Are they there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, have you people done this before? Why don't you speak? Because otherwise I'm blind. I can't see you and I can't hear you. So I don't know. I'm talking to a wall. So you must respond. Have you people done this before? I'm asking you again. Have you people done this before? Look, I'm not getting an answer. I will walk out if you don't give me an answer. Yes or no? Gautam,
Yes, sir. Sir, people are there. I don't know why they're not responding.
yeah, you know, if they are not responsive, then they are talking to a wall. That's all. Because it's an online class, the only little interaction that I can have with the students is by actually hearing their voices. And if they don't even speak, what should I make of it? So if you have already done uniform convergence, I just want to tell you that Fourier series converges uniformly. So when we say it converges uniformly, the advantages are we can differentiate, we can get f prime x by differentiating f of the Fourier series for f of x term by term. You can actually differentiate the sum. You will not be able to differentiate the sum if the convergence is not uniform, because how do you take delta x going to 0 if n is different for the two different points? Okay, so that's the reason why you must have uniform convergence. Okay, now let me go over to something else. That's application of the Fourier series. So one of the applications of Fourier. Okay, it's applied extensively in solid state physics, in crystal physics basically, where you have got the periodicity, and so you can expand the potential in a periodic fashion, or you can expand the force constants in a periodic fashion, and so forth. But the example that I'm going to give you is from simple circuits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with LCR. L is an inductor, R is a resistor, and C is a capacitor. And I can show you in the following fashion. I have a time-dependent voltage that I'm applying across the circuit. So, and I have, this is the inductance, and I have a resistance. So what happens in these kinds of circuits is that, initially the capacitor keeps getting charged. Okay. Once the capacitor is fully charged, then what happens? It will drive a current through the circuit. And when it drives the current through the circuit, the inductor develops an inductance. That means it develops a voltage which opposes, by Lenz's law, it opposes the current. So when it opposes the current, then what happens is that when the voltage builds up much greater than this voltage goes to 0 and this voltage builds up, then the current reverses in direction and goes around. Okay, so the current is once going like this, and another time it will be going like this. Okay, and the role of a resistor is actually to damp it. So damp this oscillatory current. Okay, you can write down the differential equation. I'll just write down the differential equation without going into the details of how you get the. Basically, L is a d squared I by dt squared. I is the current and is dependent on t, that is its time dependent current, plus R times di by dt. Okay, that is the damping factor, plus 1 by C times I, This is equal to the rate of change of the electromotive force, dE by dt. Okay. So if we have a steady state, by a steady state, we mean things are not changing in time, and the force is going to be zero, which means dE by dt is going to be zero. And let us assume the resistance is also zero. Then what we have is L d squared I by dt squared plus 1 by C I is equal to 0. Okay. So I can a little more in a familiar fashion, L I double dot plus 1 by C I is equal to 0. So compare this with the Hooke's law. What the Hooke's law says, mx double dot plus kx is equal to 0. Right? Because you have a force which is equal to minus kx against the direction which you are pulling, and the force is given by mx double dot. So mx double dot plus kx equal to 0. So in this case, you have an oscillation, right? Because it is like a chemical bond with a force constant, and it will be oscillating. And the oscillation frequency is given by omega, which is equal to 2 pi nu, is given by root k by m, root m by k, sorry. Okay. Root k by m, I'm sorry. Root k by m it is. Because, you know, nu is equal to 1 by 2 by root k by mu is what you are always writing. So it should be k by m. Or omega squared is equal to k by n. And in this case, L replaces m and 1 by c replaces k. Therefore, omega squared is equal to 1 by LC. Because k is equal to 1 by c, m is equal to L, so it is 1 by LC. So this is the LC circuit. Okay. So we will have undying oscillation. In principle, this is what happens when you don't have a resistor. And in a steady state condition, the current will be going in one direction once and in another direction another. Okay. Now let us what happens if E of t has that I can expand it in terms of a Fourier series with a frequency omega. That is, I want to expand it power n En e to the I n omega t. Okay. So omega will be equal to what? 2 pi by capital T. Okay. So where capital T is the time period of oscillation. So when omega is the time period of oscillation, which is 2 pi by T, then you can expand E of t in terms of sigma over n into I n. You can also assume current has the same period of oscillation. So I can expand I of t also as sigma over n Cn e to the I n omega t. Okay, the only difference is the following. That is, we know E of t, Hence, En can be computed but we do not know I of t. And we need to compute or determine Cn. Okay, because Fourier series is uniformly convergent, we can differentiate them term by term. So det by dt will be given by sigma over n En in pi e to the power in pi t, right? So that is the differentiation of E and di by dt is equal to sigma over n Cn in pi e to the I n pi t. We also have to find out what is d squared I by dt squared. One second, let me see what was omega. How is it that in? No, there is no pi. It is in omega t omega because pi is taken in. Sorry. Let me also correct it. So here I am. Okay, so what is d squared I by dt squared? Is equal to sigma over n Cn minus n squared omega squared because I squared is equal to -1 e to the in omega. Then we can take L d squared I by dt squared. So L times sigma over n Cn minus n squared omega squared e to the in omega t plus r sigma over n Cn in omega e to the in omega t plus sigma over n Cn in omega t 1 upon the capacitance C. Okay, so this is equal to sigma over n En in omega e to the in omega. Right? Now, what can you do? Since e to the in omega t are linearly independent functions, because we showed that integral 0 to 2 pi. Okay. This thing dx sine nx dx is equal to integral 0 to 2 pi cos nx dx is equal to integral 0 to 2 pi sine nx cos nx dx cos mx dx is equal to integral 0 to 2 pi sine nx cos sine mx dx is equal to integral 0 to 2 pi cos nx cos mx dx equal to 0 for n not equal to m. Okay, and last two integrals will become for n equal to m, the last two integrals are non-zero. They will give you 2 pi. Okay, so given this, because of the orthogonality, what you can do, they are linearly independent, which means that the coefficients of a given function e to the I n omega t on the left hand side must be equal to the coefficients of e to the I n omega t on the right hand. Right? Because that is what we mean by linear independence. That is, if I take everything to the left and write it as, you know, some coefficient times e to the I n omega t, sum over n, then all these coefficients should be 0. So because of that, I can coefficients of e to the power I n omega t. Then I'll get minus n squared omega squared times L plus R times I n omega, okay, plus 1 by C, this multiplied by Cn is equal to I n omega En. This is the equation that I'll get. So I can solve for Cn. Okay, to solve for Cn is very simple. So I first divide everything by L. I get minus n squared omega squared Cn plus R by L I n omega Cn plus 1 by LC Cn is equal to I n omega by L En. And if I solve for Cn, I can write down Cn as equal to I n omega by L divided by omega naught squared minus omega squared times n squared, omega naught squared minus n squared omega squared, plus I omega n R by L En. Okay, or I get Cn is equal to I n omega by L divided by omega naught squared minus n squared omega squared plus, usually this is written as 2 alpha, 2 alpha n omega I, alpha is equal to 2 alpha is equal to alpha L. That's usually be what is written. So we know En. because we know E of t. There is knowledge of E of t. Therefore, we can compute all Cn. So if we can compute all Cn, then and I of t is given by sigma over n equal to minus whatever, capital into large n, because it depends upon how many Cns you are going to calculate. Then I have Cn e to the I and omega. So you know exactly how the current is going to behave at any given time because we have solved the differential equation. So this one example, this is an example of the Fourier series calculation of the solution of a differential equation. Okay, we can also use similar technique for solving the Schrodinger equation of a crystal Hamiltonian. Of a crystal Hamiltonian. So what we mean by crystal Hamiltonian is very simple. All you have H of a crystal is equal to minus H cross squared by 2m. So in one dimension, I'll write down d squared upon dx squared plus b crystal of x and b crystal of x has the property that is periodic b crystal. That is x plus a is equal to x, where a is the periodicity of the 1D lattice. You can similarly solve for the phonon problems, not just the electronic band structure. You can also do the energy band structure, the phononic band structure. So, but these are things that you'll learn when you do some courses in solid state physics. But I'm not going to go any further into it. Now, let me go into a slightly different aspect of the Fourier series. I said Fourier series in the complex plus infinity Cn e to the power I n pi to 2n pi x by t. Okay, so this is what I had. So what I can actually do is, can we have a plot of Cn versus n? That means I have here Cn, I have n here, I have 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. -1, -2, -3, etc., etc. So basically what you have is you can write down a Fourier series for a particular function. You can show it as a plot as by showing some values at these points. Okay. And so forth. So what's happening is this figure, the points are too far apart. Now, is there some transformation I can make where the points get closer? If the periodicity is T, then we can use K equal to two n pi by T as instead of times Cn. Okay. So what I have done, I have taken this thing, rather there's no Cn, sorry. So now what I can do is I can plot Cn versus Kn. Okay, so if I were to do that, I'll have K0, which is 0, and then I have K1, K2, K3, K4, etc. minus K1, minus K2, minus K3, minus K4, so forth. And now I will see that, these same points when plotted, this is Cn versus Kn. Okay, so I have plotted Kn instead of Cn versus N, and if the periodicity increases, then the spacing between Kn, the spacing between successive K points reduces. So what we have is delta K, which is the successive K points, the difference is actually 2 pi by T, right? Because what we have is Kn plus 1 minus Kn is equal to 2 pi n plus 1 by T minus 2 pi n by T is equal to 2 pi by T. Okay, so once the successive points are only 2 pi by T apart, as T increases, then delta K tends towards 0. Okay, so then delta K reduces. So when you have very large T, then you can actually write down this whole thing Cn versus K for large periodicity as a function. So when K tends to, rather when T tends to infinity, then we can think of Cn as functions. Now let us see do this. In order to do that, what we have is the following. We have f of x, we are expanding it as sigma over n equal to minus infinity to plus infinity Cn e to the power I times 2n pi x by t, right? And where Cn is given by integral 1 upon 2 upon t, 2 by t integral minus t by 2 to plus t by 2 f of x e to the I 2n pi x by t dx. Right, this was the definition that we have for the thing. Fourier series. Actually, it will be mine. It will be e to the I. Okay. So now the problem is that if we carry out the integral, we have a coefficient. Once again, we have Cn, which is given by 2 by t of some integral. Okay. Now, as t tends to infinity, then Cn will tend to 0. Okay, so you really cannot define it this way. So what you so in order to define what will be the problem. So I'll take Cn, I'll change the variables. So Cn is equal to t by 2 pi into plus 1 by t, not 2 by t, into 1 by t integral minus t by 2 to plus t by 2 f of x e to the minus I 2n pi x by t dx, where I have taken where 2n pi, I'll replace this 2n pi by t by k. Okay, so I have Cn is equal to t by 2 pi into 1 by t integral minus t by 2 to t by 2 f of x e to the minus ikx dx. Okay, so I've just multiplied and divided by t by 2 pi. I can do this simply because I have my expansion for f of x, which was equal to sigma over n is equal to minus infinity to plus infinity. Cn e to the minus e to the I 2n pi x by t. This I can write it as sigma over n equal to minus infinity to plus infinity. Cn into t by 2 pi. Okay, e to the minus pi 2n pi by t times x times delta k. Okay, so I can ck n or c of k should be equal to t by 2 pi into t of n. Okay, so all I have done is just change the variable of summation from 2 pi x by t to the following. That is, I have written it as n equal to minus infinity Cn into t by 2 pi e to the minus I kx times delta k. Okay, so if I have written this to be f of x, then I can know that Cn ck, which is equal to t by 2 pi now times Cn. So in the equal to t by 2 pi 1 upon t integral minus t by 2 to t by 2 f of x e to the minus ikx dx. So this will be now defined this is defined because T and T cancel. So what I have is a function. I can define now, instead of putting it in the subscript, I'll define it as C of k as equal to 1 upon 2 pi integral minus t by 2 to t by 2 f of x e to the minus I k x dx. Okay. And my f of x now will be defined as equal to integral minus t by 2 to t by 2 c of k e to the I k x dk. Okay, because this summation that I had, this now becomes an integration. Okay, so in the limit of periodicity, I can define, so in the limit t tending to infinity, I will have c of k is equal to 1 upon 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity f of x e to the minus I k x dx, and f of x itself is given by integral minus t by 2 to minus infinity to plus infinity c of k e to the I k x dk. Okay, but now the modern so in order to make it symmetric, what they did was the following. They said that capital F of k is a Fourier transform, and that is 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity f of x is of e to the minus I k x. They wrote it as e to the I k x dx. They define it this way, and f of x now will become 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity f of k e to the minus I k x dk. So this is how the Fourier transforms came up. Okay, so what I was trying to prove to you was when t goes to infinity, that is when the periodicity goes to infinity, which means I can think of any arbitrary function as long as it is well behaved. That means it is not, it vanishes at infinity. Okay, that is a well behaved function. Then I can always write down a function f of k, which I call the Fourier transform, which is given by 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity fx e to the I k x dx, and the inverse transform is f of x equal to 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity f of k e to the minus I k x dk. So you see that when you are looking at the function f of x, you have to sum over all the states e to the I k x. That is the reason why you are integration variable is dk. And when you want to determine f of k, you have to integrate over the space of the function, space over which the function f of x is defined. That's why you have d of x. Okay, so don't think. So whenever it is the function here is k, the integration is over x. Whenever the function is x, the integration is over k, and you have e to the I k x to get the Fourier transform of the function, and e to the minus I k x to get the inverse. Okay, any questions so far? Any questions? I'll give you the reference to this. The reference to this is Eugene Butkov article. So basically the series becomes an integral because you can write it in such a way that you have a continuous variable instead of the discrete variable n. You can have a continuous variable k, in which case the series becomes an integral and the coefficients are also represented by an. Okay, that's all that's happened. Nothing else has happened. It's straight and simple. Any questions so far? Okay, you can read it up and then get back. Okay, now let us see what I can go into. I'll just give you an example of Fourier transform. Just waiting to see. Okay. Yeah. So let me construct the function. Take the function fx equal to e to the minus x squared. Actually, e to the minus alpha x squared. Okay. These are called Gaussian. Gaussian functions are some of the most important functions, both for general mathematics as well as in quantum chemistry, quantum physics, whatever you're looking at, and also in the theory of probabilities, because there is something called a central limit theorem which says that if you have random events and if you are looking at the probability of this sum of these random events, okay, then the sum of the probabilities are always distributed like Gaussians. Okay, so this is called the central limit theorem, and this is very, very important. This is a basis for various techniques in computational physics, such as Monte Carlo simulations and so forth. So it's very important. I will not go into it, but you can look at very simple probability theory books, and you will see that Gaussian functions come there in the context of what is called the central limit theorem. Okay, so now I want to find the Fourier transform of f. Okay, this function of e to the minus alpha x squared is very interesting. When alpha is large, okay, when alpha is large, then this is going to be having a very sharply big function. Okay, okay, when alpha is small, it's a very spread out function. And it has very many interesting properties, like e to the minus alpha x squared can be normalized between interval minus infinity to infinity. So if you normalize it, then the normalized function is the g of x I can call is 1 upon sigma times root 2 pi e to the minus x minus x naught squared by 2 sigma squared. Okay, so this is a very interesting function. You see, sigma is the variance. X naught is the mean, and the function has this form, because you must know about these functions because these are extremely important functions. So this is x naught, okay, because that is where the maximum is and it's also the mean, and you will find that full width at half maximum. This is actually given by sigma times 2 times root ln2. So that is this quantity, and this is equal to 2.355 sigma. Okay, so they are very interesting properties, and you will see that this is the function, the area of the function is mostly confined to the interval x naught minus 3 sigma to x naught plus 3 sigma. So if I have minus 3 sigma here and plus 3 sigma here, then something like 99.7% of the area is there under this. Even probably 97% is under this, which means that whenever you have kind of Gaussian functions, you just have to worry about how sharp it is, because if it is sharp, then most of the function is between minus 3 sigma and plus 3 sigma. Okay. And, manufacturing, I don't know how many people have heard of Six Sigma rule. So for most manufacturers, they want to make sure that the spread from the average is not large in their products. Okay, for example, if they're cutting 1 meter length rods, okay, they want to make sure that this 1 meter length rods, all the rods, lie 99.97% of the rods that are cut lie within 1 meter plus minus 3 sigma. And because it's plus minus 3 sigma, the width is 6 sigma, and they want to make sure that this sigma is small. Okay, so that is what makes this thing reliable, the product reliable. In the case of aircrafts and things like that, they go for plus minus. Error is much less. Okay, so it is not always the average that is important, but also the spread in the values is also important. The spread in the values is given by sigma, and so you want to keep sigma as low as possible whenever you are trying to get very accurate averages. Okay. Now, I mean, I don't know why I'm talking somewhat on this thing. So now I want to find Fourier transform f of x equal to minus alpha x squared. The Fourier transform of this is given f of k equal to integral minus infinity to infinity e to the minus alpha x squared dx. Sorry. Times e to the ikx dx, and I have a 1 upon root 2 pi here. Okay, so I can actually write it as 1 upon root 2 pi, and I can change the variable from alpha. I can just write it in the form integral minus infinity to infinity e to the minus alpha x squared plus ikx dx, or actually 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity e to the minus alpha x squared minus ikx dx. Now, okay, I can write down alpha x squared minus ikx as x root alpha squared minus I k by 2 root alpha times x plus k squared by alpha 4 alpha squared minus k squared by 4 alpha squared. So this is exactly what you do in completion of the squares when you are trying to resolve a quadratic equation. So I can actually write it as x alpha plus rather minus ik x root alpha minus ik by 2 root alpha the whole square minus k squared by 4 alpha squared, right? Because if I square it, what do I get? I get alpha x squared on this side, and I'll get minus x times root alpha into minus x times root alpha into ik by 2 root alpha into 2 minus k squared by 4 alpha square, or rather plus minus k squared by 4 alpha. Okay. So, sorry, this is not what I should do. This is equal to that. Okay. So you see that this quantity is nothing but alpha x squared minus ikx, because 2 and 2 cancel, alpha and root alpha cancel, and then you get x times ik. Let me move this a little bit. So I can write down my integral. I can write down my integral as f of k is equal to, I can change my variable to u is equal to x minus x root alpha minus I minus I k by 2 root alpha. Okay, so I will get du is equal to root alpha times dx, or dx is equal to du by root alpha. So I will get f of k is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi alpha times integral minus infinity to infinity e to the minus u squared du into e to the minus k squared by 4 alpha squared. Okay, so this is what I'll get as the integration for f of k. Now, this integral minus have you people ever evaluated this integral? Integral minus infinity e to the minus x squared dx. Have you evaluated? So actually, you can write it as it's an even function, so I can write it as equal to twice integral 0 to infinity e to the minus x squared dx. And this is I can write I squared as equal to this is equal to 2i. Okay, so I squared as equal to integral 0 to infinity e to the minus x squared dx times integral 0 to infinity e to the minus y squared dy. Okay, so this is just x and y are dummy variables, so I can do that. So I get I squared is equal to integral 0 to infinity integral 0 to infinity e to the minus x squared plus y squared dx dy. I can convert x is equal to r cos theta, y is equal to r sin theta, and dx dy is equal to 1/2 of r sin theta d theta. Okay, because that's the area of the triangle when you have, like you have a circle, okay, and you have r, you go to r plus dr. So this is r plus dr, this is r, and this is d theta, theta plus d theta, and the area element is the area of this thing, which is half of r, okay, half of r plus dr into r into d theta dr. Okay, so this is what you get. Okay, so I squared I can write it as equal to integral 0 to infinity integral 0 to infinity x y squared is nothing but r squared, it is a minus r squared. I have half of r, okay, and then I have sin theta d theta dr, and theta goes from 0 to 2 pi, okay, and r goes from 0 to infinity. So this limits I have taken as integral 0 to 2 pi. So this can be written as integral 0 to 2 pi. Sorry, I'm only going for half the integration, so it is 0 to pi. Integral 0 to pi sin theta d theta integral 0 to infinity e to the minus r squared r dr. So this is nothing but a gamma function. It is just gamma 2, and this integral you have evaluated many times. So what I'll get is actually I squared is equal to, I think, 1 upon 5, or I is equal to 1 upon root 5. So what I'll get if I do all this integration is that f of I is equal to root 5. Okay. So if I were to do all this integration carefully, then I'll get f of k is equal to that e to the minus k squared by 4 alpha squared, which was outside the integral sign, times root pi divided by root 2 alpha times pi, is equal to 1 upon root 2 alpha e to the minus k squared upon 4 alpha squared. So the thing is the following, that is, if f of x, you have alpha is large, okay, then you have a very sharp function, because you see that e to the minus alpha x squared, if alpha is large, then it is going to fall off very sharp. But if you look at f of k for the same large alpha, it will be spread out very wide. Okay. And so if f of x is well spread out, so this alpha is small, so the function is going to decay very slowly. It's like this. But the Fourier transform of that, f of k versus k, will be very sharply. Okay, so this is very interesting because look at the following. If the ikx that you have, okay, is a plane wave or a free particle wave function. Therefore, integral e to the ikx corresponds to a wave. Okay. If the wave packet is very sharp, not spread out much, then the position uncertainty is small. Okay, and now I want to find out the momentum of this of the state e to the ikx is equal to h cross k. F of k is spread out means implies uncertainty in momentum is large. So this is nothing but the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So because you can interpret e to the power ikx as free particle wave functions, and the forming the Fourier transform as actually of f of x is equivalent to localizing the wave function. If you localize the wave function, then the momentum is spread out. If the localization is more, the spread in momentum is more, and vice versa. Okay, so this is exactly what we have been able to show. So this shows that if the spread in momentum is large, the spread in position is small, and vice versa. Okay, let me look at now a slightly different property of the transform. What is the Fourier transform of the differential function f prime x? Okay, so what I am given is f of k is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity e to the f of x times e to the minus ikx dx. Okay, so I think I've used the correct notation. Yeah. Okay, so I want to find out what is the Fourier transform of f prime of k. That is equal to 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity f prime x e to the minus ikx dx. So how do let me move it? So I can integrate by parts. Integrate the right hand side by parts. So what do I get? I have 1 upon root 2 pi is always here. This times I'm taking f prime x to be u prime and e to the minus ikx as v. So uv will be f of x e to the minus ikx. This goes from minus infinity to this at the this thing, edges of the interval, minus infinity and plus infinity, minus of, I have to differentiate this. So I will get minus ik times integral minus infinity to infinity f of x e to the minus ikx dx. Right? This is integration by parts, where I've taken u prime is equal to f prime and b is equal to e to the minus ikx. Okay. So what will this give me? See, look at this. This is, I'm going to be getting this one to be f of at infinity times e to the minus ik infinity minus f at minus infinity e to the minus ik. Okay. Now the function fx is well behaved. You almost never come across a function which has got finite values at infinity, because it doesn't make sense. To any physical sense, it does not make. So because the function f of x is well behaved, it vanishes at plus minus infinity. Therefore, first term is 0. Then what? Then I have Fourier transform of f prime x is equal to minus ik into 1 upon root 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity f of x e to the minus ikx dx, or that's equal to minus ik times f of k, because this quantity is f of k. Okay, so you see that similarly I can show, the Fourier transform of f double prime x is equal to minus k squared f of k. Okay, so what you have from this is that if we know f of k, we know the Fourier transforms of all the differentials of f of x. So what does the differentials? So if you are looking at a differential equation, let us say that you are looking at a differential equation. Let me write something like a f double prime plus b f prime plus c f is equal to d. Okay, so some inhomogeneous second order differential equation. So if I just transform it, then I'll get minus ak squared f of k plus ik, or rather minus ik b f of k plus c f of k is equal to d of k. You know the, so let me call it g of x, so that this becomes g of k. So this becomes g of k. So now you see you can solve for f of k. F of k is equal to g of k divided by c minus ak squared, okay, minus ikb. Okay, so you get f of k. So if you know f of k, we can inverse transform and get f of x. So you'll be able to solve the differential equation very simply if you use a Fourier transformation. Okay, so that is one of the places where Fourier transforms become extremely important. And in the next class, I'll talk about what is called the Fourier integral theorem, and then I'll go into what is called theory of distributions and delta functions. Okay, so I will stop at this point, and if you have any questions, you can either email me or you can raise the questions now. Okay, so shall we stop here? Okay, so let me stop sharing. The attendance is thinning down, but anyway, the YouTube lectures are there if people are interested in learning. But like I have said, for grades, people get what they earn. I'm not going to give you grades. You are going to earn them. So if you do well in the exams, you understand and put in effort, then you'll get a good grade. Otherwise, you may flunk the course. Okay. Thank you. Bye.